Our next speaker is Mr. Peter Kovach from the Department of State. He's a member of the Department of State Senior Foreign Service and is the current director of the Office of International Religious Freedom in the state's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. A career expert in strategic communications, he's recently served as director of the Global Strategic Engagement Center, a U.S. government interagency office that coordinates both policy and messages for communications aimed at countering extremist ideologies. He has also served as diplomat in residence at the University of California in Los Angeles and has had assignments in a number of countries, including Pakistan, Morocco, Japan, Jordan, Bahrain, and Yemen. Mr. Kovach, I think just one word. We've decided to proceed. We'll have the next three speakers in one after the other in succession and save all the questions till the end.
Maybe I should be relieved. Let me thank the organizers. Let me also ask Serdar and his helpers to hand these out. Do we have the other website? Yeah. This is our fancy bookmark from the rollout of the annual International Report on Religious Freedom, which is the signature product of my office and which we rolled out with Secretary of State Clinton just before she got on the plane for Pakistan on Monday. It gives you, the bookmark is suitable for reading, and it gives you the website. There's going to be a second slip of paper probably with a website of a report I'm going to discuss that's really almost the centerpiece of my paper. So, formally, I'm really grateful to my friends in the Gulen Movement, the Rumi Forum, and on behalf of the Department of State this time, let me thank you for inviting me. Before I present my thoughts on a fairly dramatic change of late in U.S. government diplomacy, I want to acknowledge on a personal level my appreciation for the terrific work the Gulen affiliate in both Los Angeles, the Pacifica Institute, and our own Rumi Forum here in the greater Washington area do. In these two cities, where I have most recently resided, the Gulen Movement is if not the major bridge builder among different faith communities and faith and belief communities. Personally, I'm a lifelong student of religion, and I believe that the world's great faith traditions at heart would all use their faiths to build bridges to diverse populations in the shrinking world rather than erecting barriers between them. I understand this truth to be especially strongly stated in the Quranic articulations to the effect that if Allah had wanted to make people the same, He would have. So we are enjoined to respect difference. Also, that there should be no compulsion in religion. This latter revelation seems to be totally of a piece with God's injunction to the ancient Israelites after their exodus from Egypt, to know the heart of the stranger, and as the Bible points out, that because they were once strangers in the land of Egypt. This is a current running through the Abrahamic traditions and through many other of the world's great faith traditions. So, those nice words about the Gulen Movement and universal tolerance and knowing the heart of the stranger aside, today I'm going to touch on an issue that will not please everyone in this audience. It is the issue that has been framed as the defamation of religions in international fora for over a decade by the Organization of Islamic Conference, known as the OIC. The OIC, motivated in part, I believe, by the travails experienced by Muslim guest workers in Western Europe over recent decades, has tried to inject into international law the concept of defamation of religion, which would place bans on speech as the way to protect religions from being defamed. This is a concept that we as Americans, represented by a government that takes international law seriously, have a very, very hard time embracing. While we acknowledge the pain of stereotyping, hateful speech, and bigotry directed toward strangers who practice a religion different from the majority, we have three problems with the defamation of religions as a legal concept. One is that human rights law is predicated on individual rights, not the rights of a people, a nation, or a faith movement. Human rights law is an edifice put together and assembled by the international community over time that's designed to protect the individual against prejudicial actions of the collectivity, which in many historical instances, including in our own national history, have stemmed from the actions of organized and self-identified religious communities lashing out against the strangers with whom they share social or civic space. The second reason is a little more delicate. It is the incontrovertible fact, prevalent across all societies and all religions, that such protections, when afforded to a predominant religion, manifest in the form of laws that result in restrictions of thought, conscience, religious choice, and practice, and expression of all of the above. In other words, prejudice and discrimination on a mass scale supported by governments. To spell it out, yes, I'm talking about blasphemy laws and laws against apostasy. And before my Muslim friends take this too much to heart, let me just point out that in our recent International Religious Freedom Report, which you now have the key to the kingdom, it's a kingdom of over 1,000 pages, beware, chastises India for provincial anti-conversion laws, official Christian churches in many countries of Southern and Eastern Europe for discrimination against other Christian churches, and the Buddhist-dominated government in Burma for persecution against Muslims and Christians. Such restrictions are an anathema to American values and the values enshrined in international human rights law, centered as it is on individuals. A third problem is that defamation carries a particular legal meaning that does not apply to systems of belief. A defamatory statement is by definition, we heard about Socrates and definition, one that is false and not simply offensive or different from another's point of view. Statements of faith, belief, or opinion fall into the latter category. One man's truth is the next man's blasphemy. As Secretary Clinton said just this past Monday as she rolled out our report, and we sat there tired, relieved, beaming, some claim that the best way to protect the freedom of religion is to implement the so-called anti-defamation policies. I strongly disagree. Clinton said also, the protection of speech about religion is particularly important since persons of different faiths will inevitably hold divergent views on religious questions. Efforts to combat defamation of religion typically result in restrictions on freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and expression. As President Obama said in his Cairo speech to Muslims around the world, suppressing ideas never succeeds in making them go away. Allow me to return to the nub of the problem, again from a US government point of view, but one where I think we might be able to bridge some opinion gaps on this question. I think many OIC colleagues and friends would agree. It's the negative stereotyping of religious groups, including minority groups within a larger tradition like Christianity or Islam. That is a very, very central part of the problem. We acknowledge the painful sociological fact that such stereotypes, perhaps more often than not, result in discrimination and even violence, which is the central issue that this conference addresses. And I'm certain no one will disagree that such prejudicial and negative characterizations, coming from the lips of government leaders in particular, but also from leaders of religious or other communities, are particularly dangerous. I think we can all agree on that. To sum up, over the decade that the OIC has put forward the idea of codifying prohibitions on defamatory speech as a matter of principle, the United States has, and I don't say this proudly, with equal adamance insisted that such a development would violate our fundamental insistence on freedom of speech and expression as Americans. The United States would further insist that such prohibitions contravene the basis of international human rights law, which, based as it is on the right of the individual again, in the face of hostile collectivities, including, at times, religious organizations. Finally, our government holds that human rights law does not in any sense defend collectivities against the dissenting views and practices of individuals, to just kind of reverse the equation. So, to be blunt, we're talking past each other, and we have been. And the President's words in Cairo challenge us in the US government, as well as our international partners, to do better than that. And that's, frankly speaking, the diplomatic breakthrough I want to tout. I'm very proud of it. My office was a part of it. So, in Geneva last month, we did just that, and that, as I said, is the dramatic change I referred to in my first couple of lines. While not compromising on our basic adherence to freedom of expression in Geneva at the Human Rights Council, we reached out to the OIC directly in an attempt to craft a mutual acceptable text and to advance the discussion of mutually acceptable solutions to the all too common problems of intolerance and hate speech, especially when these lead to discrimination and worse, violence. The resulting draft resolution, a draft consensus, crafted jointly by Egypt and the United States and adopted by unanimous consensus, was a huge and real step forward in acknowledging a problem and the role freedom of expression can play in the solution of that problem. This resolution, however, is not one that ends the debate, a debate which continues this very week and this very day in the UN General Assembly Third Committee. The resolution does break a decade-long stalemate of talking past each other between the West, whatever that means, and the OIC, and moves a vital dialogue on human rights and defamation forward, dramatically and symbolically, in this instance, co-led by Egypt and the United States. Rather than going through a line-by-line analysis of the draft resolution, the slip of paper, do you have that yet? Yeah, good. The slip of paper gives you what we do believe is the correct internet address, and you can look at it yourself. I would like to argue that freedom of expression, American style, is not just an antithesis in a dialogue, but in fact the solution to stereotyping and hateful speech, defaming religions, defamation which all too often leads to acts of, again, discrimination and violence. The United States government is resolute in its commitment to the protection of freedom of expression around the world. I think you all know we do stand for this. At times we may be criticized for the way we package it and the pragmatics of it, but it is a principle, and it's a principle that I believe American people of all stripes hold dear. We believe that countries and civil societies that protect this right are ultimately more stable, more economically and socially successful, and definitely more secure. And I hope I would agree, well, Professor Davies might agree with that from what he said. Invoking against President Obama's thought that suppressed ideas don't go away, I would add that hateful or derogatory ideas directed toward religion are best dealt with when they can be expressed and exposed. Repressed by law or regimes of fear, they fester and are far more likely to emerge in virulent or violent form. Freely expressed in a society that protects freedom of expression, hateful and derogatory speech can be dealt with in a couple of ways. Again, Secretary Clinton from Monday said, based on our own experience, we are convinced that the best antidote to intolerance is not the defamation of religion's approach of banning and punishing offensive speech, but rather a combination of robust legal protections against discrimination and hate crimes, proactive government outreach to minority religious groups, and vigorous defense of both freedom of religion and expression. First, robust civil societies, including aggrieved groups, can remonstrate in the media in a free society, in appeals to other citizens and to governments to call out hate speech. Governments, in turn, can reach out to aggrieved religious as well as racial or ethnic or other offended groups to make sure they have a direct channel to invoke moral and legal protections. But secondly, governments should undertake to develop legal regimes against acts grounded in prejudice, acts, not words, acts, that discriminate against groups or individuals, or worse, that result in violent crimes of hate. We advance freedom of expression as the antidote for hateful or prejudicial speech, not as an abstract notion, but one born out of our own, not always exemplary history as a pluralistic society. We know from our experience in this complex American society that it does work. It works to flesh out the haters and those that indulge in stereotypes before they can grow virulent and result in these illegal, violent, or discriminatory acts. As President Obama promised Muslims, again from the Cairo speech, I considered it a part of my responsibility as the President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam wherever they occur. I believe President Obama would have said the same to adherents of any other faith tradition he would have been addressing. Citizens in a society that protects freedom of expression, however, must steel themselves to hear the worst kind of prejudice directed both against themselves or against religious groups they identify with. But at the same time, they know that there is a kind of built-in social protection where fellow citizens, civil society, including their own organizations, and government leaders themselves identify religious bigots and haters and call bad speech out in the public square. And to underline the point again, legal protection against instances where such speech turns into acts of discrimination or violence is a key part of the freedom of expression package. I know many of you here today will agree with the freedom solution, but I also realize that some of you may harbor serious doubts. In the case of the former, I hope you will take time to talk to the folks who intuitively support institutionalizing legal protection against religious hate speech and stereotyping. Among the latter group, who question my thesis, I would simply encourage you to think about what I've said. Your government has stepped forward to engage in an international dialogue on this contentious question after ignoring it for 10 years. As citizens, we can only do the same. Thank you. And if I can add one note, in the film that we saw at the beginning of this great seminar, I have to say I reacted negatively to one image, and I want to put it out there. Juxtaposed with demonstrators being beaten by police was a narrative about terrorism. Expressing free speech, even when the authorities decide to curtail it in a public demonstration, maybe even an illegal public demonstration, is not the same as terrorism. It's the kind of free speech that this country stands for.